Yeah, I will not tell you what you should think is important because I'm just offering content, and I'm not going to hit you on the head to require that you listen to me. I'm not going to do any of that because I'm much more passive about it. So fix the playing field, damn it! What? Don't say it's an unfair playing field. So all of a sudden the big issue is trans women taking the slot of a woman in an unfair playing field. Fix the playing field, and you know something? The day you fix that playing field, this conversation will look completely ridiculous.
If you've been following Neil deGrasse Tyson's career lately, it seems he's really gained a bad reputation for giving interviews on podcasts, for being rude or kind of a jackass. Some of that's detailed in this video here by Too Lazy to Try, where it shows him ignoring Joe or giving rude responses, while it's painfully clear that Neil doesn't care about anything Joe is saying. Or this video by Glidget Ronan, where he pretty much nails him as an immature, egotistical bully with a superiority complex. However, it was this next clip that brought him to my attention.
What happened was, when science discovers things, and you want to stay religious, or you want to continue to believe that the Bible is unerring, what you would do is, you would say, well, let me go back to the Bible and reinterpret it. Then you'd say things like, oh, they didn't really mean that literally, they meant that figuratively. So this whole sort of reinterpretation of how figurative the poetic passages of the Bible are came after science showed that this is not how things unfolded.
Now, Neil's broader argument in this interview is that fake Christian Science should be kept out of the science classroom, which I agree with, but the point he's making here, it just isn't true. There's a lot of Christian history that I don't know about, but I am familiar with Origen, who was writing figurative interpretations of the Bible as early as 200 AD, and Gregory of Nyssa, who was writing figurative interpretations of the Bible in around 350 AD. And I know that they were influential, so it turns out people were reading the Bible figuratively before science knew anything.
One of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right, but not enough about the subject to know you're wrong.
And he said it with such confidence, too. You know, I would really think that a guy who's smart enough to be a public intellectual would have enough awareness to know when he's out of his depth, to know when he doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, it's pretty clear he's unfamiliar with Christian history. He's got to know that. Seems kind of immature to me that he threw that in there. Kind of like an atheist in middle school trying to make a point in an argument against a Christian who does not know how to defend it because he's also in middle school and neither one of them really know what they're talking about. But I didn't like it, rubbed me the wrong way, and I'm really sick of public atheists, so now we're gonna look at some more stupid stuff Neil deGrasse Tyson's been saying.
Post-pandemic, do you think that science has taken a battering in that people have lost a little bit of faith in scientists as a result of, things that people said? For instance, that people were saying, well, if you take the vaccine, it means that you can't pass it on, the virus, and then that turned out not to be true. Now, obviously, I'm not asking you to comment on that, but just, do you think that people are now just a little bit more skeptical of scientists, a little bit more untrusting?
So yeah, there were issues in the communication. There's issues in how we receive information. There's our urge to believe the lone person, which has deep flaws completely built into it. And so I hope in a century, we remember some of these lessons as we go forward.
I think it's a very profound point. I think also as well, I guess my problem with the way that the entire pandemic was communicated, there were people who were incredibly notable, experts in their field with glowing reputations, who proffered a different view. And
that's my point. It doesn't matter. Your reputation, your title, none of that in science, none of that matters unless by their reputation, they have access to large-scale studies that they are reporting to you. Okay? But not the lone person.
I've heard Neil address COVID and the COVID response before, and it honestly sounds like he's having a different conversation than the rest of us. Here he is, asked about faltering public trust in the established scientific community. And he says, well, people don't understand statistics well enough, and that they would rather confirm their biases and listen to people like Joe Rogan and Brett Weinstein instead of the prevailing scientific consensus, which really seems to be Dr. Fauci. And he also says that the scientific community doesn't know how to communicate science well enough. And let's face it, none of this has anything to do with why people don't trust the scientific community. Organizations like the CDC and the NIH were not just doing science. They were making value judgments and assumptions that could not have been arrived at scientifically. They pretty much decided that the top priority was making sure no one gets COVID, and that all public policy should be aimed at that. They didn't care about what economists thought the cost of lockdowns would be, or about the price of food raising 20% in 2 years. They didn't seem concerned with the psychological impact of isolating people in their homes for months on end, or the educational deficit from putting kids on a computer at home for a year, or even the effects the masks would have on childhood development from making kids wear them all day, every day at school the following year. You could make the argument that the first few months we believed COVID was far more dangerous than it actually was, for reasons I'm still not sure of. Even still, without really knowing what we were dealing with, they basically chose the most radical approach to COVID they possibly could. Then when it became obvious to people that the vast majority of them didn't need to be concerned with the virus, many places doubled down on this radical approach. Recently heard on Rogan that 80% of restaurants in LA went under during those 2 years. Contrast all this with the conservative approach of Ron DeSantis in Florida. Conservative meaning slow to change. He made the establishment scientific community look like clowns, as more people moved to Florida than any other state, in spite of how terribly dangerous it was. He kept businesses open, got rid of any public mask mandates, put kids back in school, and protected people from employer mandates of a reportedly dangerous and decidedly ineffective COVID vaccines. And thanks to Ron DeSantis, me, my wife, and my kids, we got a wonderful vacation down in Orlando at Universal Studios. He even worked to make sure that medical treatment was available for high-risk COVID patients. I kept hearing about people getting monoclonal antibodies in Florida. In North Carolina, I don't know anyone who got monoclonal antibodies. I mean, I'm sure someone did, but I didn't hear about it. It turns out that science is very good at answering simple questions, like how effective are masks at protecting against COVID? But when it comes to answering highly complex problems, such as how should a society run or organize itself, and how should people live their lives, science is miserably bad. And all of modern history illustrates this, from the secular rationalism of the Jacobins in France to the scientific socialism of the Soviet Union, or the eugenics of Nazi Germany. So, it's not so much because of science that people don't trust the establishment scientific community, Neil. It's because they seem to be retarded at everything else. And how about if you suggested that the Wuhan coronavirus came from the Wuhan coronavirus lab? Oh, you were called a racist. When in fact it did come from the lab. And that lab was funded by the NIH, Dr. Fauci's organization, who lied about this to Congress. And that is why people don't trust them, Neil, you space cadet. They are untrustworthy. Where have you been these past few years? What are you talking about? And honestly, if we cared about justice at all and had any backbone in this country, Dr. Fauci would at least be behind bars.
I have this degree and I hail from this storied institution, and I'm telling you that all those people are wrong.
Yes.
Today I feel 80% female. I'm gonna put on makeup. Why do you care?
Yeah.
What business is it of yours?
Most people going through the education system 10, 15, 20 years from now would have been taught in biology classes that there's males and females, men and women. And in very recent times, in the last 5 years, it feels like this understanding is being challenged by a different view. Explain that to us, if you would.
I'm just offering a perspective you might not have had. And these are cosmic perspectives that bring your view above all that divides us. You know, there you are from space looking at Earth and you don't see any color-coded countries. Meanwhile, throughout the book, I imagine what an alien would think who has no preconceived notion of who and what we are. They just observe. And they say, oh, what a beautiful planet. I'll get to your point in a minute, but these are my lead-ups to it. What a beautiful planet. Let's get a closer look. Oh, there's land and oceans and clouds. And then they see one species sort of dominating everywhere on Earth. And it's okay, fine, we got one species. And then they look closer, and then they see that one species killing one another because of who's born on what side of a line in the sand, or who worships this god instead of that god, or no gods, or how reflective their skin is to sunlight, or whatever other reasons they come up with. And they're wondering, what the fuck is wrong with this species? They're all the same species. And they'd rush back home and tell the rest of their fellow aliens there is no sign of intelligent life on Earth. Okay?
So to be clear, Neil was going to be thinking about gender as an alien. And it's funny to me that all these scientists, they always think that aliens will be so enlightened and peaceful, but we have no idea what these aliens could be like. They could prevent low-intelligent aliens from giving birth. They could exterminate aliens with genetic abnormalities. I mean, they could be alien eugenicists for all we know. What it really seems to me is that these scientists say, oh, these aliens must be real smart, so they'd think like me. So what we're really just hearing is Neil thinking. And he goes on this really long explanation for why gender is a social construct. Just so you know, I've cut out most of it. So here we go.
If who you decide is male and female in the street is a construct of style and trends and what the beauty industrial complex wants you to see, if that's how we establish gender, then maybe some people want to be fluid within that gender identify. So they'll wear a skirt, but maybe have a beard, or they'll mix and match that in whatever way
But Neil,
you want.
sorry.
Hold on. I'm not. Wait. I'm almost done. So,
Okay.
if a person using the tools of the beauty industrial complex wants to mix and match this,
Yeah.
and they are expressing their freedom in a free country to do so, why is your job to tell them not to?
Okay.
That's my
Here we go.
only point. And so I'm speaking of gender expression and the
Yes.
freedom to do so. And
I will
if you
tell
if,
you why
if,
it's
if you want to
why people are talking
restrict
about
that, then what country are we living in?
Hold on.
Yeah,
Hold
go
on.
ahead.
So first of all, I don't know a single person, and we've talked to trans people on the show. We have trans employees at Triggernometry. We've spoken to all sorts of people about this issue. I do not know a single person who wants to prevent people from dressing how they want, or behaving how they want, or choosing any name that they want.
So this was kind of funny because Neil just spent like 5 minutes explaining why transgenders should be allowed to exist. And I don't know what planet he's been on, but that's just not really the debate down here. And his argument doesn't really work, by the way. It turns out that we limit people's rights and liberties in all kinds of ways when we feel it reasonable and necessary to do so. Imagine an elementary school teacher decided they were no longer going to be wearing clothes, because clothes are a construct made by the beauty industrial complex. In fact, if aliens came to Earth, they would see that all the life forms on this planet are naked except for our species. And they would go back home and tell everyone that we are retarded. The teacher does not want to adhere to this construct. They are just expressing their freedom in a free country. So what right do you have to make them wear clothes? I would just like to clarify that I don't have anything against trans people, and I do believe that trans people should be allowed to exist. I'm just pointing out that Neil's argument isn't a good one.
The reason the conversation has become an issue is that we assign and allow certain privileges to people based on their sex. If you are female, you get to go to places that only other females are in, like changing rooms and toilets and so on. If you are female, you get to compete only with people of your sex, because females are at a disadvantage in physical competition to males in almost every sport. In other words, we carve out certain areas where your sex matters tremendously. So your claim that today you woke up and put lipstick on and grew your hair out long and tweezed out your moustache and whatever, and therefore you are female, has an impact on other people in certain contexts in which that is a problem.
But you don't seem to have a third example. So, and even if you do, we presume that would be a very distant third compared to those two cases. All right.
No, there's a third one I can give you very easily.
No,
In this
tell
country,
me.
for politics, we have female-only shortlists for positions in Parliament. Therefore,
Oh, I didn't know
if you
about
claim
that. That's interesting.
insert yourself into categories that are deliberately designed to protect women's interests. That is the concern that people have. So there's 4 examples for you there. Please
Okay,
address them.
sure. So, interesting about the Parliament. I have to look into that to find out what the is it try to ensure the representation of women? Is that the goal?
That's correct.
Yes,
Yeah, okay,
correct.
fine. So that's a perfectly noble cause there. So, about personal changing spaces, okay? That's a solvable problem, of course. And we basically have accomplished that here in Manhattan, where I live. Practically all bathrooms are either multi-gender or solo bathrooms, so only one person at a time, or you walk into a space and there's stalls that are closed off, but then you exit the stall and you come to a communal sink. Okay?
Yes.
Yes.
So it's a solvable problem.
The idea of solo bathrooms with locking doors does seem like a great way to steer clear of this particular cultural controversy, provided your establishment is small enough to just have those. I believe I once went to a Raising Cane's somewhere in Ohio that had 3 separate non-gender bathrooms, each with a locking door. And it was great. But the idea of one big communal bathroom sounds terrible to me. I can only imagine having to go number 2 with girls in the stalls next to me. That would be so embarrassing. I mean, come on, Neil. Let there be a little mystery between the sexes. Even after 15 years, my wife and I will not do that unless the other is at least 2 rooms away. Or I imagine a girl waiting outside the stall, ready to publicly shame me if there is any trace of piss on that toilet seat. And I can promise you, it won't matter if that pee was honestly left there by some previous guy before you. She will never consider that possibility. She will shoot daggers at you and tell people how gross and inconsiderate you are. So fellas, get accustomed to either wiping some other guy's piss off that toilet seat or running the risk of this happening to you. And I can promise you that this scenario is likely. And all this reminds me that women keep their public restrooms way cleaner than men do. They will hate this. Everyone will hate this. And I just saw some stats on this, and a high estimate on the amount of trans people in our population, after considering Gen Z, is 2%. So why would we do something that makes 98% of the population feel uncomfortable so 2% could feel fine? That's crazy. It's ridiculous.
That second, with sports, very interesting. There was a case where a woman wanted to be they wanted to disqualify her from an event. And she was genetically female, but unusually high testosterone levels. And so that weirded everybody out. So I'm wondering whether the future of those sports is you don't contest gender with gender, you contest hormone ratios.
Well, hold on a second.
What
But
do
the
you think of
differences physiologically between men and women are not just hormonal. Women have a different hip angle. They have different heart capacity. They have different lung capacity. I mean, there are profound physiological differences, different bone density. We've had professional athletes on the show to talk about it.
I don't have a problem with that. So then you find ways to slice the population so that whatever the event is interestingly contested. So, for example, I wrestled in my life. I was captain of my high school wrestling team. Okay. So in wrestling, it would be unfair for me at 190 pounds, which is what I was back then, to wrestle someone 120 pounds. It would be unfair. So they have in wrestling, they said, let's make weight categories. Okay. So they make weight categories. So I don't wrestle the 120. I wrestle a 190 pounder. So a wrestling match is not just this one person against the other person. It's 10 matches. And each one is intensely interesting because they are matched. Okay? So what the trans conversation is foisting upon us is the need to find ways to slice the athletic universe such that we still have interesting fair matches? And is it a combination of, did you go through puberty as a male and then transition? Did you have puberty blockers? What is your hormone level now if you want to compete? So it requires more creative thought. Rather than saying no to it all, let's be creative about this, as we were with wrestling, as we are with practically any other sport. In rowing, there's a heavyweight rowing and there's lightweight rowing. They don't compete against each other. Somebody came up with that to resolve the problem because more than one category of person wanted to compete. So I agree with you, it's an unsolved problem, yes, but it's not unsolvable.
And two of those categories we come up with were men and women, Neil. Like Neil, I used to wrestle too. And it kind of sucks for girls in middle school and high school if they're interested in wrestling, because there aren't enough girls interested in it to make up their own team. So if they want to wrestle, they have to go out for the men's. And really the only way they're going to make it is if there's an open slot in their weight class. But once I had to wrestle a girl, and everybody told me not to take it easy on her, but I did. Because right off the gun, she felt like a rag doll. I mean, I remember thinking how strange it felt wrestling someone who had no strength. But I was scared of hurting her. So I pinned her in about 25 seconds, but I could have ended it in 10 easily. And I couldn't, even if she had been on testosterone for 2 years, she still would not have had a chance. I mean, not a chance. I don't think Neil really appreciates the physical differences between men and women. I mean, for some context, my wife, she's recently started working out with me. And mind you, I'm not a very big guy, I'm only 5'7", and my wife is in pretty good shape. She's been doing beach body workouts for years now pretty consistently. When we would work legs, she could lift 50 to 60% of my weight. But there was a vast chasm of difference when it came to upper body. I mean, while I was chest pressing 125 pounds, she was pressing 25 pounds. That's 20% of what I was lifting. And while I would use a 60-pound easy curl bar for nose breakers, she was using 5-pound dumbbells. That's 17% of my strength. My son, he's 13 years old, and we recently discovered that he can beat my wife at arm wrestling. He's never worked out a day in his life, and he certainly doesn't look like he could beat her. He looks like a 13-year-old shrimp, but yeah, he can beat her. So the strength difference is wild.
Given what we know about human physiology. So why not rise to that occasion and solve it, rather than take your older view of the world and force modern emergent conduct of people to fit that?
Okay, well, can we just come back to the female shortlist and other opportunities that women are afforded by virtue of being women? And them now being excluded from that because males are entering that competition.
Yeah, so a deeper problem, thank you for bringing that up. A deeper problem there is, why were women underrepresented to begin with? What kind of bias exists within Parliament or among the voters, maybe even the female voters, that prevented the representation from being there in the first place? That's a whole other social question that maybe can and should be answered at a deeper level than a quota coming in after the fact.
Oh, I'm not a fan of quotas, but if they exist...
That's how I would address that question.
Hold on a second. That's not addressing the question at all. The question is, female shortlist exists. Should biological males be allowed to enter those female shortlists? That's as simple as the question is.
Yeah, I'm saying I would ask why you have the short list in the first place. It's because there's something deeper that's wrong with society, that women are underrepresented in governance. So to say now, to protect that now and not try to get to the root of that problem, I think is the cart in front of the horse. So I would go deeper to that problem. So
but
you don't
there
even
are
have to
women
have that question.
whose opportunities are being curtailed today because they are being forced to compete, whether in sports or elsewhere, against people who have some kind of advantage over them.
We're in a transitional period, so we have to figure that out. But the way to figure out things that requires solutions to progressive change is not to regress it to how things once were. If that were the case, I would still be drinking from a segregated water fountain. Okay? Oh, let's merge the water fountains and let's create the opportunities from below so that we don't even need the short list. Okay? That's how I would approach this.
Okay, this one surprised me. As woke as he's been this whole time, he actually wants to get rid of the female shortlist in Parliament. Which, I wonder if he feels the same way about affirmative action for black people. But regardless, I agree they should get rid of the shortlist. But I disagree with virtually everything else he said. I mean, how is it that a renowned astrophysicist just assumes that gender parity in government is inherently good? Or that the lack of gender parity points to a society that is deeply flawed and biased? Or even if there is a bias, that doesn't mean that the bias is wrong. I mean, you don't have to listen very long before you realize these genius scientists, these hyper-rational atheists, make as many unfounded assumptions as the rest of us. Why don't we worry about how many women are represented in the HVAC industry, or among electricians? Why don't we worry about how many women are represented on oil rigs, or as truck drivers, or plumbers? The truth is that any industry or profession that serves as a prerequisite for modern civilization is overwhelmingly performed by men. And it is these men that these elite, on-the-spectrum atheist retards should be pandering to. Because it would be way easier for them to destroy a civilization than it was for them to build it. And I am guessing that Neil is pandering because he says he's thought a lot about these topics, but it doesn't sound like he's thought about them at all. I mean, a very good argument could be made that giving women political power in the United States has resulted in far more single mothers, way more government dependence, and far more young men dropping out of high school or ending up in prison, because they grew up without fathers in the home. Now, Neil says that finding solutions for progressive change is not to regress it to the way things were. But, hey Neil, not all social change is progress, or at least not progressing to anything good. The idiot Jacobins of the French Revolution thought they were making progress, and the Nazis and the Bolsheviks thought they were making progress. And not letting biological men compete in women's sports isn't the same thing as making you drink from the black water fountain, Neil. And with more people than ever choosing, actively trying not to have children, and more mental health problems than any other generation, have we made progress? Or are we sick animals?
I think a lot of people would have an issue with what you're saying, Neil, is because they see women being denied opportunities. They see an unfair playing field, metaphorically and literally speaking.
So fix the playing field, damn it! What? Don't say it's an unfair playing field, so all of a sudden the big issue is trans women taking the slot of a woman in an unfair playing field. Fix the playing field, and you know something? The day you fix that playing field, this conversation will look completely ridiculous.
And there he is, folks. The real Neil deGrasse Tyson. A pompous jerk. He's beyond reproach. How dare these pedestrian podcasters question him? You know, I think he's aware of the reputation he's developed because he was trying so hard to be nice and personable throughout this whole podcast, but I guess in the end he couldn't help himself. And it reminds me of the time that Adam Ruins Everything guy went on the Joe Rogan Experience. Now, he said that sports were designed with male bodies in mind, and that we could design them in such a way that would lead to greater gender parity. But like Neil deGrasse Tyrant, he had absolutely no ideas on how to do this, when they are the ones suggesting we do it. Now, it would be great. I mean, it would be utterly utopian if we could somehow make sports a level playing field between men and women. But honestly, how could we possibly do that when men on average are bigger, stronger, and faster? And not by a little, but by a lot. I mean, we could take Neil's idea of using new criteria for categories seriously, because we can test for things like hormones, strength, and speed. And in individual sports, we could feasibly get rid of gender categories. But in testing for those things, far more often than not, we are still just going to see men competing against men and women competing against women. There does already seem to be plenty of resources devoted to testing in professional sports, but how much more impractical and costly would all this be for high schools and middle schools? Now, even though it would be the fastest, easiest, and most expedient way to solve this problem, Neil seems to think it would be unfair to discriminate against trans women. But honestly, would it be? I mean, he keeps talking about making a level playing field, but sports are in fact a level playing field. The rules in sports are the same for everyone. What is variable are the competitors. Neil and these strange leftists act as though trans women have a right to compete on these teams, but they don't. No one does. The further you go in sports, the more exclusive they become. Notice we never have this conversation in reverse about trans men competing against men. We don't think they have a right to play. We don't care that they are underrepresented. And the truth is that trans men will never be good enough to compete on men's teams. And this conversation will forever be one-sided. I mean, heck, if I tried out for a college female swim team right now, I wouldn't make the cut. I would be the slowest woman out there. However, as long as we allow trans women to compete against women, trained male athletes who may or may not have some degree of gender dysphoria will have incentive to compete as trans women. Not only does it put women at a disadvantage, but in sports like wrestling, boxing, and MMA, it puts them in danger. Now I gotta tell you, you have to be pretty smart to become a public intellectual. But in much of this, he just sounds like an airhead. I mean, why is he pandering like this? Then I remembered. He got Me Too'd. Now, it was about 4 years ago by 3 or 4 women, and his name was dragged through the mud all over the internet. Nothing really came out of it, and he made it out the other side, but it couldn't have been easy for him. And now I think he is terrified of the mob.
That, or his kids are really into activism or something.
Now, I kind of hate to be so hard on Neil, but I am sick of these professional atheists. Neil, Sam Harris, and little fairy boy Richard Dawkins. I mean, I'm okay if they don't want to believe in Christianity. I don't fault them for that. But for the fact that they couldn't see that a shared religion might just serve an important societal function, where people share common beliefs and values, in a religion that believes people can be forgiven for their sins if they forgive others, a religion that believed you must love thy neighbor as thyself, a religion that believes that serving each other is the best way people could live. You know, in Colossians chapter 1, Christians are taught that Christ holds the world together. But these fools couldn't understand just how true that is in a very practical way. They believed that without religion, everyone would just be autistic and hyper-rational, just like them, and then the world would be perfect. So with the hubris of a 15-year-old in AP classes, these geniuses begin to pull at the phrase of our social fabric. And what they unraveled has let loose upon the world every irrational and antisocial belief I can imagine. I mean, there really is something stupid about these people. To set about destroying the world, and they couldn't even see that they were doing it. You know, I hope that Armageddon, the final war in Revelations, is literal. Because I want to fight these guys. Neil, Sam, and Dawkins. Same day, just give me 30 minutes in between each one. Atheists, I'm going to smash your boy, guys. And stop inviting Neil deGrasse Tyson on your podcasts. Thank you.
So how do you fix the playing field? I'm curious.
Well, that's hard. It's hard. We've been through. Thank you for that question.
I think look, if you're advancing that as a solution, I think I have a right to ask you.
No, it's great. I don't have a fast solution.
I'm the realest thing in the game, Danny Boy, if that's my name. Look at me like I'm insane because I'm eating people's brains, banging dames, chasing bane. We've been in and out of lanes, killing all these artists out there. You would think I'm Bruce Wayne or Liu Kang. Mortal Kombat, that's a game. Falling out like Little Wayne. I'm on that next level thing. So please do not run your mouth. I don't want to call you out. Don't make me run up in your session, blow your brains out. Then I get your mom and hit her with the lights out. All my life, man, they look at me, they full of doubt. Look like a heavyweight fighter in his final bout. I'ma hook 'em with the left and leave 'em knocked out.